hearing different people in the church always saying, we'll meet underneath that tree of life when we get to heaven. We'll meet underneath that tree of life. And as the years go by, I start thinking, boy, that's starting to add up. That's really going to have to be a big tree, because there's a lot of people going to meet together underneath the tree of life. Javier, it's nice to see your kids with such energy. We had the blessed joy of having our grandkids, some of our grandkids, about, how many at the house? We're 5, 6 of them, at our house this last weekend. And, as you get older, you start forgetting how much energy little kids have. And we have such kind neighbors. We live in a townhouse, so we have somebody here and somebody here, and we keep thinking, who's going to knock on the door? Who's going to knock on the door? Nobody knocked on the door. We have such good neighbors. But it's sad when the house quiets down and everybody leaves. I have a story to tell you. It's a story, it was first told maybe about 2,000 years ago or so. And in this story, there was a boy. He was a teenager boy. He was a rebellious teenager. He wanted nothing to do with his father. And so he takes off. He has nothing really, but he figures he can make a go of it in some village and get a job and stuff. And so he would go from village to village, working a little bit here, working a little bit there, and trying to earn some type of a living. And as he started getting a little bit older, he found that it was harder and harder to really make a living. And then there was a drought in the land, and when there was a drought in the land, he was unable to get a job anywhere. And man, I tell you, he had such a hard time. He started getting so hungry that he was willing to eat almost anything. One day, about 20 years after he had left home, no, actually about 50 years after he had left home, he comes around back to where he was raised, and he finds that there's a huge party going on at this guy's house. And he's curious. So he goes up to the gate, and he's looking into the gate, and he sees all this partying going on, and servants, and there were all these people that were just quite wealthy. Even the servants looked pretty wealthy. He noticed that there was one guy that was very wealthy. He had gold chains around his neck. He had pearls. He was sitting on what they called like a lion's chair with his feet up on a stool that had embroidered with pearls and beads and stuff. And he could tell that this guy, he must be royalty. It's amazing. And he thought, if I could only get a job here. But he thought, no way, they wouldn't hire me. I'm ragged, I don't have shoes, I don't have anything at all. I mean, I don't fit into this. And so he decided that he would turn back. But the guy that was sitting on the lion's chair saw him and recognized him as his son. But the son did not recognize him as the father. The father, trying to think of how he was going to deal with this, decided to send a couple of his servants out and grab him and say, tell him that he can get a job here. So these two servants go out there and they talk to him and they say, you can get a job here. Maybe working in the fields, maybe doing this, doing that, but just some job that you can make a living at. So the boy decided that he would take that job. In his rags and everything, he goes and he starts working in the fields, working hard, very, very hard. He was one of the best workers. Time goes on, and the father, not divulging who he is to the son, not even telling the servants or anybody else in the house who he really is and the relationship between them. And so he gives the son more and more responsibility. Time goes on. 20 years pass, and the son continues to work to the point that the father is now giving him in charge of his whole estate. Finally, the father is pretty ill, knows that he's not going to live much longer, decides that it's time to tell his son who he really is. So he calls his son in, and he says, I'm going to give you a new name. I'm going to call you son. Well, that kind of made him feel pretty proud, because he always looked up to him, and he thought that was pretty neat. And so the father went on to say, not only am I going to call you son, but I'm going to give you total responsibility of the estate because I'm not going to be around much longer. And then he finally says, also, you are my son. You're my real son, my only son. And the boy just could not believe it. You're my dad. And he was just ecstatic. And he realized that all that he had been working for was to accomplish this ability to be in charge of the whole estate. And so he was excited about that. And as the story goes, the son becomes the owner of the estate. The father passes away. And I thought of that story. You can find that story if you Google it. It's in the Buddhist Sutra, number 4. Buddhists have a similar story to what we call the Prodigal Son in Luke 15. And I'd like for you to open up your Bibles to Luke chapter 15, and we're going to read some of this, of what Jesus tells of his story. Because you'll notice that in this first story, the boy doesn't even know who his father is. And he has to work his way to earn a position, to earn his way back into the graces of the Father. And so in the Buddha religion, they don't talk about grace. They don't talk about how God is forgiving or Buddha is just forgiving. But they talk about how you need to work at earning your way back. And we grow up that way, don't we? As little kids, your parents teach you to work to get your allowance. I remember I was just talking to Karen about this the other day. We would have a school bus come up to our house in the summertime and pick us up. We were kids. I was 8 years old. And we would go out and pick strawberries a lot, pick green beans or blackberries or whatever was in season at the time. And I remember doing that. We'd get up early in the morning, the bus would come, we'd get on the bus, and it was always exciting because we could earn a little bit of money. And this money was important because it would go to earning money for our clothing, for our school, and stuff like that. So we'd work all summer long doing that. And I feel bad that kids don't get to enjoy those kind of things. But you know what was the most interesting part for me, the most exciting part, was you'd be so hot after working all morning long. I'd get out my sack lunch. My mom would always give me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, my favorite peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and something else and something else, something else. But the peanut butter and jelly sandwich is what I remember the most. And then we were allowed to spend 1 nickel, I think it was 1 nickel, might have been a dime, 1 nickel to go and get a pop. And we would go into this big water cooler soda pop machine. Anybody remember those? I think they worked the best in cooling down your sodas. And you could reach in there. I think you put a dime in or a nickel, put a dime or a nickel in, and flip this lever, and you could pull out your soda pop. And it didn't have corn syrup in it either. It had real sugar in it, so it tasted different. In fact, I remember some time ago they had a throwback. It was a Mountain Dew is what I'd always get, a Mountain Dew. And I remember they had a throwback Mountain Dew that was made with sugar and not corn syrup. I didn't like it. You get so used to these terrible things that we eat that we think it's okay, but I didn't like it. But back then, on a hot day when the sweat's just coming down, and that peanut butter and jelly sandwich and that Mountain Dew, I thought it was just the best thing in life. It was great. It was great. But we work and we work and we work to earn and to earn. But God has a different story. And if you'll turn with me to Luke chapter 15, we'll be starting in chapter 11. And pay close attention to this because it deals with 2 different boys, okay? We have boy number 1, he's the younger, boy number 2, the older. And remember a couple weeks ago we had the story about the lost sheep and the lost coin. we're going to find that the lost sheep and the lost coin also represents these two boys. And it seems like to me that when God told these stories, He didn't separate them like somebody did when they separated all the chapters, all the verses and stuff. But it seems like all three of these are actually one story. It talks about the lost sheep, and then the lost coin, and then the prodigal son. And it just all flows together really nicely. So starting with verse number 11, Then he said, Jesus is speaking, and remember, he's speaking to the Pharisees, he's speaking to the tax collectors, he's speaking to the scribes, and he's speaking to, of course, the sinners, okay? And so he's saying to them, and he said, a certain man had 2 sons. The younger of them had said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So the father divided them his livelihood. Now, I used to think that this boy was selfish. He's talking to the father. He says, give me everything that you owe me, But I find out that that's not maybe what's happening here. Before the father dies, a lot of times, he would divide up his inheritance. And he could do that early on, anytime. So the son is saying, let's just go ahead and do it now. You're going to do it sometime anyway, so let's just do it now. And the son that is talking is the younger son, so he only gets 1/3. Because there's only 2 in the family, so the oldest always gets a double portion of what the rest get. So there's 2/3 he gets. So the son is asking the father to do this, and the father complies and says, sure, we can do that. And so then in verse 13 it says, and not many days after, the younger son gathered everything together, and he decided to journey to a far country. And there he wasted his possessions with prodigal living. Prodigal living, lavishing living, just blowing everything, spending it as if it was growing on trees. And the prodigal son, this boy, didn't do it right away. Evidently, he planned his trip, because it says that he waited a while, and then he decided to go and to do this. So he puts it all together. Maybe he cashed it all in so that he'd have money to spend. I don't know. But he goes and he just blows it all. Then in verse 14 it says, but when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in the land, and he began to be in want. A kind of a similarity between this and the Buddhist story, isn't there? He began to be in want. So he lost everything now. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him, the citizen, the owner of the land, sent him out to his fields to feed the swine. Now remember, Jesus is telling the story about a family that's most likely a Jewish family. And so we have a Jewish boy going out and living a life that's not that of a Jew. And then in the end, he has to end up feeding swine. Well, swine with a Jew is pretty bad. I mean, if you're a Jew, the last thing you want to do is be joining yourself with the pigs, okay? But that's where he is. And so that means that he is at the lowest point of his life. He has nowhere to go but up. It says in verse 16, and he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. Even though he's working a little bit, no one gave him anything. He was hungry. His clothes were probably just rotting off of him. But when he came to himself and realized, I'm at the bottom. Have you ever noticed or known anybody that was at the bottom of the barrel in their life? It's a sad, sad thing, isn't it? And some people at that point, they end their life. But if a person get turned around at that point, there can be a good ending. So when he had come to himself, he said, man, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and here I am out here perishing. I did a very foolish thing. I left my family. I left the father that could give me everything I wanted. And all I have now is a bunch of pigs to take care of. That's pretty bad for a Jew to have to say that. And so he said, I will arise, in verse 18, and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, and I have sinned against heaven. I have sinned against you, and I am no longer even worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. Have you ever felt like that in your life when you're praying to God and you're thinking, man, I don't even belong being a part of God's family. I don't even belong being a Christian. I just don't fit. Everything is going against me. I've not done anything right. That's where he was. He felt like he was no longer worthy to be called even his son. He says, make me like one of your hired servants. I've heard people say, if I go to heaven, if I can just go to heaven and even just be the one to sweep the streets, I'd be happy, And that's kind of where he's at. He's saying, if I could just do the worst job ever for my dad, at least it's not going to be feeding pigs, I'd still be happy. And so then he arises in verse 20. He arises and he came to his father. But now, this is where the story is so different from that of the Buddhist version of the prodigal son. It says he arose and came to his father, but when he was still a great way off, his father sees him, kind of like maybe at the top of the hill, just as he crests the hill coming down into the farm. He sees him up there on the path, and he had compassion on him. The other father didn't seem to have much compassion on him. This one has compassion on him. And the father does not hesitate, but he runs and he falls on the neck of his son and he kisses him. And he hugs him, he embraces him. And you can imagine the reunion. Remember when we were talking about the lost sheep and the lost coin, how when the lost coin was found, how the lady jumps up and she runs and invites her neighbors and say, it's time to have a party. This is a wonderful thing. I found my coin. And then when the guy found his sheep, he did the same thing. He brings it in and he has a party. The party probably cost more than the sheep itself, but that didn't matter. The point was he found the sheep and the sheep was saved. Same thing here. The son is saved. The son is here. The son is alive. And so he realizes that and he just cannot contain himself. He is so excited about his son returning home. And the son said to him, Father, starts to give his little spill, Father, I have sinned. I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father doesn't listen. The father's so excited that he's here. The father said to the servants, bring out the best robe you can find, put it on him, and then put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. So put a robe around him. It's like what Jesus does when we come to him. He puts his robe of righteousness around us, right? And then the father said, put a ring on his finger. The ring meaning that I'm going to bring you back into the family. I'm going to give you all the rights that anybody else would have in this family. And he does that. It's like a signet ring, how they used to melt a little bit of wax and then they would put the ring on it and then it would put a seal on it or something. And so he's giving him those rights. And then he gives him sandals because he's barefoot, right? Makes him as comfortable as possible. Gives him the opportunity to look like he really belongs. Now, the other father in the other story didn't do that. He left him with his rags. He left him without shoes. He left him to go out into the field and work with the other workers. But not Jesus, who is represented by the Father. He puts his robe of righteousness around us. He makes us feel as though we are one with him. That's an amazing thing. And he says to do this, and then after that, he does one more thing, and he says, bring the fatted calf here, and then kill it, and let us eat and be merry. He's wanting to have a party. Just like the coin and the sheep, they all had a party. And now this one's having a party too, because he has returned home. You know, that's one of the biggest points in these three stories that we cannot forget, that whenever we have strayed away from God, or when we have a family member or a church member or a friend or somebody that has turned their backs on God, or have done something that caused them to go away from God, when they come back, all of heaven, it says, rejoices. We too should rejoice. It should be one of the grandest moments of our time. Anytime that we have somebody walk through that baptismal tank, we should have a party. Not just say amen, but we should have a party, because that's what all of heaven is doing, is rejoicing and singing. Do you ever think of God singing? Do you? I've never thought of God singing, but I read something last night about joining with God singing. And I never thought of the Father singing for some reason. I don't know why. Can you imagine what his voice would sound like? Wow. Man, it would be so amazing. Now the story goes and makes a little twist here, verse 25. Now the older brother, the older son, was in the field, and he came out and drew near to the house, and he heard the music and dancing. Now the older son had been working for many, many years, out in the fields, keeping the farm going, making sure that everything balanced out properly, making sure that they had enough cows this year for food, enough cows to sell, and make sure they had enough hay and all that. He had a lot of work to do, and he had to do it all by himself because the father was getting older, right? So the son was always working. He comes and he hears all this happening. So he called one of the servants and he said, what is this? What's going on? I didn't know somebody had a birthday. I didn't know there was a party. What's going on? Why wasn't I told? I didn't get the memo. And it goes on and on and on. He says, I don't get it. I didn't know we were having a party, and I've been out working all day. And he says to him, the servant, your brother has come. And because he has received him, the father has received him, safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. Not just a calf. It was the fatted calf, the best calf ever. But he was angry. He didn't like that. He would not go into the house. Have you ever, probably you haven't ever heard of this or done this, but can you imagine in your mind somebody coming in through the baptismal tank and you storm out of the church because they're coming in? But that's what's happening here, you know? And that's a sad part of the story. When all of heaven is rejoicing and this son is angry. He was angry and he would not go in. So the father doesn't just leave him to his own. The father says, I got to go visit my son. Just like God. God never leaves us out in the cold, no matter which side of the fence we're on, even if we're standing on the fence. He never leaves us alone. Therefore the father came out, and he pleads with the son. He pleaded with the son. The son was not giving in very easily. So he answered, and he says to his father, Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I have never once transgressed your commandment. At any time, I have kept them faithfully from the first to the end. And yet, how many times did you give me a young goat? How many times? You never gave me a young goat, that I might make merry with my friends. The son doesn't get the picture, does he? He doesn't get it. He's just thinking about himself. You never did this for me. He doesn't realize his position in the family either. He's thinking that the father should just give him. He's not understanding the relationship that he really has or could have with his Father. That relationship is pretty important. In verse 30 it says, "But as soon as this son of yours," have you ever noticed in your family? I remember growing up, I had a stepdad, and if us kids didn't behave correctly, it doesn't even have to happen in a stepfather-mother type of relationship. It happens in any home. But I remember my dad would say, "That son of yours did this, you know. That son of..." My mom couldn't really do that back to him. That didn't work. But he would always say that, and he would make sure that she knew that I was her son at that point. I guess he wasn't real proud of me at that point. So, and anyway, this is what's happening now. "But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood," he's taken that third and he just wasted it. Your livelihood. He's saying that belonged to you, Pops, but it really didn't. The Father gave it to him. He devoured your livelihood with harlots, and what do you do for him to reward him? You kill the fatted calf for him. That just doesn't make sense. You do that for him, and I've kept all your commands, and you don't do that to me. Verse 31, "And he says to him," the Father, "Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry," because we needed to be glad. We needed to have a party. We needed to celebrate, because for your brother, the brother that left, was dead and is now alive again. He was lost and is now found. The story has so many strong implications here. First of all, the son that took off would be like the sheep that got lost. The sheep knew it was lost, right? The sheep knew it was lost and it couldn't find its way back. The son knew that he was lost. He did come back, but he didn't know how to get back into the graces of his Father. He thought he would have to become a servant. And so the sheep that was lost was so happy, so glad when the Father found him. I mean, when the shepherd found him and brought him back. He knew that he was reinstated to the fold. And the son also, when he was brought back, given the ring, given the robe of righteousness, given the sandals, knew that he was reinstated to the family. So they're very much the same. And then the other son, the son that was out in the field working, he did not realize that he was lost because he had done everything the Father said. We have people in our churches today that do everything. I mean, we could go through the Bible and we could say, I do this, I do this, I do this. I keep the commands of God. I don't fail him in any way, like Nicodemus was saying that. But yet they're still lost because they do not work, they do not develop a relationship with their Father. The son didn't have a relationship with his Father. He thought that he had to just do all the work. It was all him. But that wasn't it. The Father was wanting a relationship with both of his sons. If you don't have that relationship, then number one, I don't know. I don't know if anybody has ever felt this, that you go to church and you do all the things that you're supposed to do, but you don't feel fulfilled. You don't feel happy. You don't feel excited about it. And maybe it might have to do with, maybe do a reality check, I should say, of your relationship with Jesus. You know, how is that relationship going? Because if we don't have that relationship and all we're doing is the doing, then it's usually not a very happy Christian life. But then, on the other hand, I always think of Adam and Eve, and you wonder if God is really fair sometimes. It seems like sometimes people have such a harsh punishment for such a little deed. Adam and Eve, what did they do? The only sin that I know of that's recorded is what? They ate a piece of fruit, right? Wow, we had some amazing fruit this morning. Some organic nectarines. And then we had also, we picked some amazing, have you ever seen organic protein-enriched apples? Have you ever had that? Anybody ever have that? You can get them free over at Wynn's place. They have a lot of worms in them. That gives them the extra protein. But you can cut around that. And so you probably don't get the protein part, but it's protein enriched and they're organic. You can't get better than that. It'd be a good sales pitch, I think. But in any case, all they did was eat a piece of fruit and they had to leave the garden. It's almost like they had to leave heaven. They could not go back in. They had an angel there guarding the gate, right? They spent the rest of their life doing their sacrifices at that gate, bringing them closer to God, I guess. But only eating an apple. And I thought, why is it that one little thing can cause such a problem? Because they did ask for forgiveness. You know, God is a God of love and a God of compassion, and He requires of us absolute obedience. But the problem with that is we don't obey absolutely correctly. So are we all doomed? I do a lot more than just eat an apple, that's for sure, even if it is protein enriched, but I do a lot more than what they did. And the good thing is that God is a God of love. That's the key. He's not like the Buddhist God, the Buddha, who makes you work and earn your way. All we have to do is accept Jesus. Jesus died for us so that our mistakes and our problems and our blunders can be forgiven. But you know, there's three different ways to sin. Did you know that? 3 different ways to sin. And only one of those ways you'll never be forgiven for. And I'm going to tell you this. I may be wrong. I don't know. But I think this is probably pretty true. Okay. Remember Monty Hall? How many of you remember Monty Hall and the 3 doors, right? Door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. You say, I'll take door number 1. It's about winning a car. You could either win a car or you could win a couple of goats, all right? So everybody wanted to win the car, not the goats. I'll pick up door number 1. So then they would open up either door number 2 or door number 3, whatever one had a goat behind it, and give you an opportunity to change your choice. Okay, I'll go to door number 2. As if that would really make a difference, you know. Just stick with what you got. But door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. It's like 3 different sins. The only thing is, you don't choose. Well, you could choose as to which way you want to sin. Maybe we do choose which way we want to sin. So one way is this. I did something that violated God's command. You know, we're all judged on the commandments, right? You know that. That's the criteria that God has laid out there. It's the only criteria. And so I did something that violated God's 3rd commandment by breaking it, which is, does anybody know what the 3rd commandment is? Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. So by cussing or swearing and things like that. Now let's say I did that. Maybe kind of accidentally I blurted it out, you know, and I feel bad about it. I'm remorseful. I don't want to do it again. You know, I've tried to get away from that kind of a life. And so I don't want to do it again. I want to be forgiven. Would God forgive that? Yeah, He'd forgive that, wouldn't He? Fortunately, I'm so glad that God forgives us on all these things. Another way, let's see here. Do I want door number 2 or door number 3? I'll do door number 2. I continually break the 5th commandment, which is found in Exodus 20, verse 12. It's about what? What's the 5th commandment? Yeah. Yep, honor your father and your mother. Does it just apply to father and mother? not just a father and mother. It's a relational thing, give honor to other people. I really enjoyed being in the Philippines. If you go into a room and you're in the Philippines and there's older people there, you're supposed to not just walk in front of them. That's so disrespectful. But what you're supposed to do is greet them, acknowledge them. You reach your hand, you put your hand out, they'll put their hand out, and you take their hand and put the back of their hand to your forehead. You always do that. You don't miss that. You miss that, and you're out of there, okay? You don't want to miss that, especially if you're trying to marry somebody over there. Boy, I tell you, you make sure you do it right. I continually break the fifth commandment. It's about disrespect for other people, emphasis on older people, older than yourself. I feel, number one, I feel bad about it, like the other one, sometimes anyway. I don't really want to do it again. I want to be forgiven, but I don't want to change either. It's me. It's my lifestyle. It's the way I am. How can I change if that's the way I am? That's the way God made me, He made me disrespectful, so that's just the way I am. And I figure, that's okay. I can ask for forgiveness. Do you think God would forgive me for that one? How many say yes? How many say no? What's that? I'm not sorry because I don't want to change. Because if I change, well, it'd just be a lot of work. I'd have to remember all these things, and it'd just be hard. And the key is that part. I don't want to change, okay? And that could be with anything. I envy something. So that's just the way I am. I envy this, I envy that. I wish I had this, I wish I had that because I'm not real rich. And so I want this and I want that. And that's okay because I think God will forgive me. But if I don't want to change and I continue to just say, God, I know you said it, but hey, I just don't want to change. Not on that one, but I'll change on the others. Well, then there's one more. So that's two different ways to do something wrong. The third one is, I continually break one of the commandments, but I don't realize it. Okay? I have always desired to do God's will. I'm sad. I feel that when I do something wrong and I realize it, I do want to change. I pray that God will continually show me the right path to take, and I am committed to change when God reveals new truth. But if He doesn't reveal it to me, how can I change, right? How many times have missionaries gone to these remote islands where they didn't ever know anything about God? Do you think that they will always be lost, that when they die, they never knew about God, the one that we teach about and stuff? Are they going to be lost, or do they have an opportunity to be saved, even though they didn't hear the three angels' message or anything? What do you think? Will they be saved? Yeah, they'll be saved. It's based on what we know and how we accept it, right? Yeah. We have a God that is a God of compassion, a God that is fair, a God that is overwhelmingly trying to find the slightest reason to save each one of us. That's a big thing. That's not just something just to let go over our heads. It's a big thing. We serve a God that is an incredible God. We're going to be singing a song, in our closing song, and I want you to pay really, really close attention to the words on this song. I'm going to read some of them out here. What's the number? Song 296, is it? I think. 296. I've wandered far away from God. All through our lives, there's going to be times that we have wandered or will wander, and sometimes we don't even know that we have wandered away from God. It says, the paths of sin are too long, I've trod them. I've been on that path way too long. It's easy for us to recognize that our relationship with God sometimes needs to change. We need to build on this relationship with God. Verse 2, it says, I've wasted many precious years. Now I repent with bitter tears. And the key is like King David. He repents, you repent. Verse 3, I'm tired of sin and straying, Lord. I'll trust thy love and believe thy word. And that's the key. We need to trust God's love, believe his word. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Adam and Eve, I'm sure that taking of that tree, that little bit of fruit, it didn't make sense to them that God said, you can have everything else, but don't eat anything on that tree. Oh, what is so special about this tree, God? I just don't get it. It looks just as good as everything. Well, actually, it looks better than anything else. And God said, just don't do it. And it's just that simple. If God says don't, don't. If God says do. God is that way because all he is wanting us to do and to understand is he simply wants to have a relationship with us, with people that are willing to do. No matter what. No questions asked, just do. Number 5, it says, I need his cleansing blood. I know. Oh, wash me whiter than snow. Lord, I'm coming home. If you want to come home with me to heaven, and of course we got to meet underneath the tree, right? Everybody else says, stand with me and we'll sing this song.